You are listening to the Unusually Well-Informed podcast.
Welcome to the Unusually Well-Informed podcast. I'm your host, Tim Hampton. My unusually well-informed guest today is Sid Apaya. Sid is partner at Elements Ventures Accelerator, chief operating officer at Modgarden, and a strategy and transformation consultant. Today, Sid and I are going to discuss his mission to reduce the rate of innovation failure and the future of food and nutrition. Sid, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's my pleasure. Sid, you are very busy. You are a partner at a venture at Accelerator, a chief operating officer at a startup, and a strategy and transformation consultant. Is there a theme that links these roles for you?
There is. So I, just to give you a quick background, I was in CPG for about 20 years. Senior level, both in Asia as well as in North America. And I've had the opportunity to turn around a couple of businesses. But I'd always been interested in innovation and entrepreneurship to really understand why people struggle. Because I could see patterns of, where people were making mistakes. And so I used to read up a lot about, why some organizations were successful and why others were blind to it. And this has been going on for about 7 to 8 years. So I thought I may as well actually experiment. And so the last gig that I had in a large corporate organization was a turnaround environment. But basically, I took Silicon Valley thinking, which is, cause and effect. And I, translated this down. I didn't use any of the Silicon Valley spiel and translated down to say, let's do this. I think the one faux pas I might have made was saying, let's test and learn. And I got ribbed for it for a little bit. So, I started, trying to get business experiments conducted.
Yes.
Group. Yeah. But anyway, I found that successful. And so then it morphed into, I joined Elements Ventures Accelerator. So he's a former Ivy grad. There were 2 other Ivy grads with me. And we were at Ryerson, where I was giving a talk on plant-based foods. And, I had, a line of entrepreneurs coming and asking me questions. And one of them reached out to me and said, listen, circular economy, I want to transform the world. He's a former Wharton MBA. And he said, can you help me out? And so I helped him out in his strategy. And so I started working with 2 organizations. And so for me, it was an opportunity to go up the scaling model. And the third element is I do consulting projects, particularly with jobs to be done research. It's very easy with startups because a lot of startups in the plant-based space, they get to a point, and after a point of time, they need to get the rate of turns inside a store. That means the number of units that they sell within a store has to increase to continue the growth rate, right? Because you can do only so much of distribution. Distribution is finite. And they stop after a point of time. Right. So you really need to peel back and understand why, because nobody understands why somebody is buying their product and why somebody is not buying their product. And that's where jobs to be done comes in. So that's a little bit of the consulting work. I've dialed back on the transformation work.
Okay, so I want to explore jobs to be done more, but and it's interesting you said you're scaling back on some of the transformation work, because one of the questions I wanted to ask, and maybe it's still of interest to you anyway, is how do you distinguish between strategy and transformation?
Sure.
Yeah, let's explore what the difference between those and when they overlap.
Right. So strategy is about choice. The folks at Roger Martin, I think, really capture that really well. It's about choice making. Where do you play? How do you win? What capabilities do you build? And you keep going forward with that, but you got to experiment and test because everything is a hypothesis, right? So that's your strategy. How do you get from 100 million how do you work backwards? How do you get to 500 million if you're 100 million? What are the choices that you have to make to get there? And M&A might be one of them. That's strategy. A transformation might be a couple of things. So you might need to be a business transformation. I'll give you an example. There was an email digital marketing agency that I helped. So one of the questions are they were just going very old school with their email marketing, and they didn't adapt with the times, and they were losing customers. And guess what? Who's eating? Who moved my cheese? Who's eating your cheese? MailChimp, right? So
Yeah.
what do you do? How do you adapt? What new capabilities do you build? That is business transformation. And you get digital transformation like what Scotiabank is doing, or RBC, which is how do I adapt to the times with technology coming on board? And I'm this large elephant, and I need to move faster because Amazon and a whole host of fintech companies are coming and attacking me. So does that help you understand the
Absolutely. And it's funny you should mention MailChimp. Did I hear correctly the news that they just got bought by Quicken? Did you hear this?
No, I didn't.
I heard it. I can't verify it, but that's what I heard. And I think it's really interesting what Quicken's doing. But anyway, that's an aside. A couple of definitions. First of all, CPG is consumer packaged goods, right? So the kinds of things we would find on a shelf and buy regularly. What does a chief operating officer do? What's the difference between that and a CEO, a chief executive officer?
Great question. I've had to define that. It's a number two in command.
Okay.
It's the second person, but usually in a classical definition, a chief operating officer is somebody who manages all the day-to-day elements of the business, while the CEO becomes the face of the organization, manages the investors, manages the board, sort of like external view. And so you create more time to yourself, because that public image with social media and everything that's happening these days is really quite important.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I would call a chief operating officer. But again, I've seen job descriptions where you have chief operating officer who's somebody who handles production, supply chain, and so on and so forth. So the definition can vary.
Would it be fair to say that, I mean, I'm sure it varies from organization to organization, but would it be fair to say that a CEO is responsible for strategy and the COO is meant to implement that strategy?
That's fair to say. But again, I'd say it's different. It really depends on the people involved. Very often, I've seen, more recently, at least in the startup world, you'll have someone with a good product or a good business idea who's been able to raise funds, but doesn't have the kind of experience that they require, but they still are CEO. Right. So that person is not necessarily very good with strategy. They might have strategic chops, but they don't understand the discipline of strategy, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you bring on someone who's experienced it and also can execute. And that's where it's kind of like the new definition, and it's not necessarily formalized, but I've seen that happening more often. That's where I come in.
Okay, thank you. The idea of a transformation, one possible strategy is to defend what you have, whereas a transformation is to say we're going to try and get something else. So that idea of going from 100 million to 500 million, we're going to have to put something new on the shelf, usually, right, to do that. So there's a change. Have you heard the expression? I'm sure you've heard the expression of a competitive moat, like the idea of protecting what you have. Yeah. There are two viewpoints on the idea of a moat. One is that a moat immobilizes you as well as fending off competitors. And others are saying, well, actually, no, any business that hopes to survive needs moats. What are your views on that?
So Alexander Osterwalder from Strategizer, the person who created the business model canvas, he's released a book. He released a book a couple of years ago called The Invincible Organization. And so you speak about this idea of ambidextrous, being an ambidextrous organization, where you have, and I'll come to your question,
That's right.
but the point is, to be a successful organization in the future, you need to be ambidextrous. That means you're really good at executing the primary business of what got you to where you are, right?
Mhm.
Which is your cash cow. But because of disruptive technologies and new forms of innovation, and innovation being decentralized, if you will, across the globe, the shelf life of a typical corporation is down from 65 to 12 years, right?
Right.
So you have to change. You have to learn to be able to adapt. And there's a lot of studies. Clayton Christensen spoke about it, where you need to have almost like a separate business unit to drive your own disruptive innovation, if you will. And so this is what Osterwelder talks about, and he says this is how you can create an organization that A, has a moat, and you can build that moat, but you need to start creating new moats, because there are new business models that are coming in, and they do not come from your same industry.
Mm.
They come from elsewhere. Look what happened to the telephone, and look what happened to, way back in the day, railroads, and then cars came along, right? So they usually come from outside the industry, and Rita McGrath talks about that in her book.
So let's talk about jobs to be done framework, because this is, if I understand correctly, one of the tools you bring to all the roles you play. So can you outline what that is and how it's useful?
Sure. So this came out of Harvard, I would say. There are a few other people who are involved, but the person who really made it famous was Clayton Christensen, and there are a few other people who write about it. Bob Moster, for example, and a few others. What they found was, why are organizations struggling to understand what is their competitive, competitive arena, and how do you define that competitive arena, right? So in the old world, coffee, let's take Nescafe, for example, right? 30, 40 years, Nescafe ruled the roost in most countries outside of North America, right? Suddenly you had Starbucks coming in and going globally. Now, yes, Nestle might say, we're not in the business of making cafes, but you just lost out on billions of dollars of revenue.
Yes. Yeah.
If you were interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's part of a coffee consumption, right? And so that's an arena. So now to define what jobs to be done, because that's a kind of a job with the same category, coffee, right? So the job to be done is best described as, in a particular context, right? You have a context might be, Clayton Christensen gave this wonderful example of milkshakes, right? McDonald's was struggling to increase their milkshakes, and I bring jobs to be done to life with the milkshake example. So McDonald's had this really, really fancy marketing department, spent billions of dollars on marketing, did all kinds of traditional market research, and that's the kind of experience that I also sort of came from. And they couldn't increase milkshake, sort of revenue from milkshakes, which was a strategic priority to them. So they knocked on Clayton Christensen's door. So a bunch of Harvard guys came along, and they said, let's do the jobs to be done approach. So they followed these folks who were coming to this McDonald's, wherever it was in the States, and they noticed that people typically tended to drink milkshakes in the morning and then in the afternoon. And so then they would stop and talk to the folks in the morning and say, what are you trying to achieve with this milkshake? And what were the other products that you were looking to compete with? And they said, look, we've got a 45-minute to 1 hour drive, and it gets really boring. Plus, by the time I reach office, I'm starving, right? So I need entertainment with whatever I'm eating, and I also need to make sure that I'm full. And this milkshake does a great job doing that. Okay, so why don't you try something else? What else have you tried? So he said, these guys said, you tried a banana, you finish it too quickly, but it doesn't fill me up. So that's called a functional, it's a functional filling me up. It doesn't do it for me. We tried, donuts, but donuts are all kind of like crumbly and spilled all over the floor.
Yeah.
So that's another functional thing. Plus, it might give me a sugar crash. So I don't necessarily want that. I tried Snickers once; it's good, but I feel guilty about chocolates, right? So this milkshake does it really good because it lasts me at least for half an hour during the drive as I drive, and it fills me up by the time I get there. So the job has three elements: functional, social, and emotional. And in this case, they were able to quickly identify that the functional element was keeping them full when they got into office. But the emotional piece was, it was really fun while drinking the milkshake. There was a second cohort in the afternoon for a different reason. I'll stick to the morning reason why people bought it. So these people really enjoyed having the milkshake. So what McDonald's did once they understood that insight, they started putting things like they made it a little heavier, the morning recipe, along with a few items small items that when you suck it, you get this, oh, there's a little surprise when you suck it, like it might be a fruit piece, and so on. And so sales skyrocketed. And so I wanted to test this. And so I've done about 80 customer interviews, jobs to be done, customer interviews. It really, really works. And I came from very sophisticated marketing tools, but when we were talking about jobs to be done. You asked the question, but I want to contrast this to where I came from. Large CPG is currently struggling right now. I don't know whether you know about it, but innovation rates, the failure rates is about 80%, right? So you get a 20% success rate, and you're spending a lot of detail or a lot of money on market research. You might throw $100,000 to $200,000. Yes, there are hits, but more often than not, there are failures. And you have to understand why. And a lot of it's highly data-driven, highly fact-driven. 70% like this particular product. Let's take Nescafe. 73% like Nescafe. What am I going to do about it? What do I change with the product because of that? And that's why you contrast the two approaches, and the insights that you come from jobs to be done is very, very granular and helps you understand what to do, why people are buying it, and why people are also not buying it. So you're very, very clear about it. And I want to caveat one thing. There is consumer marketing is now looking at jobs to be done in certain other companies. And they're also looking at ethnographic research to help them get along the way. But jobs to be done, I would say, at least for the startup world, is extremely powerful because you do 10, 12 interviews and you're good to go.
So am I right in saying that there's a connection to that with the start with why idea from Simon Sinek? This idea that you need to, instead of obsessing about the flavor of your or the form factor or whatever, you need to think about why your customers are buying your product. What box are you ticking, right? Does this give you a different lens on the new Coke story? Because to me, it feels like one of the jobs to be done of Coke was to be an anchor of familiarity in a crazy world. You open a can of Coke, you go to a restaurant, it can be Indian, it can be Thai, it can be Irish. You get a Coke, at least that's an anchor of normalcy for you. No, we only have Pepsi, or no, we only have new Coke. That's why people's heads exploded, because that's what Coke is. It's not just a sweet beverage.
Right. I'd absolutely agree. I mean, if you've taken that lens at that point in time, was it in the 80s that was launched? If you take it in that lens, absolutely, you're bang on. There's an example that I have, you're probably not familiar, but there's a brand called Maggi Noodles. There was a Harvard case study on it, and a big one, which came out of Nestle India. And it's a huge, huge product. They did about 40,000 tons of the product, about 20 years ago. And what Nestle did at that time, they said, hey, listen, health, there's a shift in health. So rather than frying the noodles, let's air dry it. And so they invested in a brand new manufacturing plant with an air dry technology and blah, blah, blah. And there was a huge, backlash from customers. They came back and said, drop it. So from an Indian perspective, that was like new Coke over there because it was so prevalent over there. And so the company had to raise its hands, apologize, and then go back to the fried, noodles and
new noodles.
New noodles, and it did well after that. But lesson learned. You got to test, and you can't make big leap of faith assumptions.
Well, and that was the funny thing about the new Coke stories. They tried so hard with all their studies and their focus groups and everything, but the question they were asking is, do you like this flavor? They weren't asking the right question, right?
Right.
So let's sort of expand on the idea of how things can go wrong because you're not asking the right question, and talk about why so many startups fail.
Right.
Do you have a perspective on that? What is going on there?
I do. So my belief, and I don't have statistics, but this is just anecdotal, observational, the failure rate in my mind with startups is about 95%. Very few really get off the ground. And our eyes are always, sort of like jump to the successful organization, and people get excited, but the failure rate is huge. I'd say 5 reasons that I found just working with startups and helping them. One is when people get an idea, so they use association and say, oh, I have this brilliant idea, and everybody really likes it because they think it's the next thing since sliced bread. And so it becomes a solution or an idea, and you fall in love with that idea. But very, very few people go and figure out, test what problem is it trying to solve, because that's counterintuitive. There's some algorithm in most human beings that they love the idea. They think the ideas bundle the product and the problem, and everybody else loving the same idea, right? That's the biggest one. So when I look at pitch decks, actually, there was somebody who's a senior executive. He was CEO of a couple of companies, and he showed me his pitch deck, and I said, your product will fail. And I looked at it. It took me 3 seconds to quickly look at it, because the second slide is usually the problem slide, and most people typically in a pitch deck problem slide will say 70% of the world sees this as a problem. That's a red flag, big time, because you haven't gone granular to understand why people are having a problem there. So that's one. The second thing is, as you progress, you're not testing leap of faith assumptions or big assumptions, be it in your product or your strategy. That's number 2. Number 3 is, you might, let's say that you get past the barrier of what's the problem and you have a good idea, right? You're looking at, if you have a poor partners, co-founder issues, advisory board, so you don't have somebody who has a right blend of relevant experience. So relevant experience in your industry, you're asking for trouble. Or you have investors, right, who don't have an idea. A lot of investors do, but you do see investors like angel investors who are like, okay, I'm going to throw some money at you, but I get super excited very quickly. Or I might have VCs who have very defined timeframes of what success, of when this organization should be successful. And so that starts putting pressure on the startup. So it's sort of this good idea, bad bedfellows, if you will. So that's number 3. Number 4 and 5 is interesting. I'd say number 4 is emotional intelligence. It works in the corporate world as well as over here in the startup world. And simply because people are not able to understand their blind spots. They're not able to recognize it and solve for it, right? you may not be able to do business development really well, and that's okay. Find someone who can help you. You may not be able to build, or you may not have the skill set to do, let's say, financials, right? Go find somebody. But a lot of people just plod on because the standard approach is you got to do everything. You got to understand that you're super good at some things, but you can't be good at everything else.
Right.
And then the last one is this idea called false starts. And that's the fifth one. This idea of false starts is very interesting. Have you read that Crossing the Chasm?
I have not read it. No.
Right. So this whole idea of you got early adopters, then it picks up. It's almost like a bell curve, right? And so then you get mainstream, and then you get laggards, and so on, right? It happens for technology. It happens for plant-based foods, and literally for everything. So the idea of a false start is you've done your testing, but you built your product for early adopters, and early adopters love it. And so they keep finessing it towards the early adopters, but you're not able to take it to the mainstream. Now, all your investors at that point of time are super excited about, oh man, we've got so much traction. That is called a false start.
Interesting. Okay. Do you think the world is full of startups that the plug was pulled on too soon? Because that's always a challenge, right? There's always this idea that we should pivot, move on if we're not seeing immediate results. But then we also hear stories about people who push their project for 20 years and finally it took off. And so it's really hard to understand. I think it's really hard to know when to quit. That's the hard thing. How do you assess that?
So there is a method that we at EVA are actually trying to work through. We've partnered with some European business schools who have sort of solved for that. It's called the scientific method, right? And so we want to bring it to EVA. We're assessing it at this point of time. But Adam Grant spoke about it more recently. They did a test with close to about 1,000 entrepreneurs in Europe and in the UK and a bit in Africa. And they randomized with like a test and a control group. And what they found was, so they used the classic things like customer research, business model canvas, lean startup, the classic tools to get your product off the ground. And so both groups were given that. But the second group, which is the test group, they were also taught how to think, how to reframe your thinking, right? And to look at things in a very, very scientific way from the methodology standpoint, to say, it's like how you're doing a chemistry lab experiment, right? What do I hope to see? How do I? And so you have to test a couple of things. You have to test for your product and you have to test for your strategy, right? Both of them. And it helps you see things in a very holistic way. They had tremendous success approaching this model. For the group that was a control group, people who weren't taught how to think differently, they typically a year down the line were on average less than $300. And you'll see this if you Google Adam Grant on his latest book. He talks about this scientific method. Whereas the other group, a year down the line, they were on an average $12,000 in revenue because they took this approach. And their success rate, what they did differently is because they were doing this, this scientific-based approach of how do I frame the problem, what is my hypothesis, what leap of faith assumptions am I testing, how do I test it, how do I learn about testing, what did I find, and when do I know that my test works, if I've crossed a particular threshold. They found that once people really understood it, they decided to walk away, right? Or they decided to pivot, right? Because they now were able to understand a different insight. I'm a big believer in this approach. We were trying to make sure that we finesse it here locally in Canada. And then after that, probably reach out to the government so that we can get it to more people, because it goes back to what I want to do. How can an average person build their dreams? Because everybody has ideas and everybody wants to get out and do that. And there has to be a method to do it. Innovation is counterintuitive to most people.
So this is, you broke up a little bit when you described the scientific method, but it sounded a bit like, and later on you went into more detail, but it sounds almost like it could be described with a scientific method canvas. This idea that you would have a hypothesis and how are we going to prove it? And what are the benefits that we hope to see? When do we pull the plug? You go into it with your eyes wide open and decisions made before the disappointment so you don't respond emotionally.
Correct. So I'll contrast this, even forget the startup world, even a corporate environment, right? I'm the brand manager of, poor Nescafe, but let's take Nescafe because I've already
Nobody ever said poor Nescafe before, but okay.
Yeah, poor Nescafe. I mean, I love the brand. I mean, not I love Nestle. I mean, I used to work at Nestle, so Nescafe came up to my mind. So there's a brand manager of Nescafe who says, "Here's my strategy. I do strategy 1, 2, 3 to take it from 100 million to 130 million next year, right?" And strategy 1 is going to give me 10 million. Strategy 2 is going to give me 15 million. And then the balance 5 million is strategy 3, right? And so those are the drivers. But because of the culture of the large corporate environments, and this is nothing to do with Nestle, but this is broader, most organizations, it's all about, how sure are you when you stand up there? Have you done your ground now? Do you look good and confident, right? Mm-hmm. So there's no chance for you to change as much, which is part of the cause. It's a cultural issue, right? So the scientific method would go completely opposite to what the Nescafe brand manager might have presented, right? For those 3 things. Okay, you got these 3 things that total up to 30 million that you need to deliver for the year, but they're all hypotheses. And a good CEO or a good leader would say, yeah, I recognize these hypotheses. Now let's go prove it. And it's okay to pivot, right? It's okay to pivot, but let's go prove it. Give me evidence or reasons to show that. Otherwise, we can finish and we can pivot. And so what are the underlying leap of faith assumptions? How do we test or at least show directionally that it can go? And there are, if you think about the business model canvas, are you familiar with it?
Yes.
Right.
I've seen it. I haven't used it recently, but I've seen it.
Right. So you got value proposition in the middle, various cost drivers and various revenue drivers on either side. You have to test each of those elements, like the leap of faith elements, but it starts with consumer insights, right? And then you keep rolling up into different business models because business models create more value, right, to the business. And it also helps you, this scientific method helps you look at things in an integrated way versus what I've seen with the startup world is, okay, I've done customer research, what's next? And even then, my thinking is quite siloed. So it's got to be integrative to then be able to determine, do I stay or do I stay the course and finish, or do I pivot?
Right. Yeah, it's almost like when you're siloed like that, it's like saying, I've done research and I can confirm this is a coin without recognizing the next step is to flip it. And so you could spend so much time, you could devote so much time and attention just to proving that it's a coin, and then you don't even bother to flip it, which could be really quick and could reveal so much. When is failure worthy of celebration? Because you hear that a lot. There's all kinds of congratulatory talk about failure is good.
Yeah. So I've been personally trying to dive into business experimentation because I really believe that for the next 20, 30 years, that, understanding what type of experiments to do in different situations, be it for a digital organization or a classic product organization, will really help you. I think Jeff Bezos really captures this really well. He says if you've done things repeatedly, like for Amazon, build a warehouse, failure to build the next warehouse should get you fired,
Yes.
right? However, if you're going out to build Amazon Echo, the fact that you're taking calibrated experiments, right? And you're knocking on, let's try this, let's try the next one. That didn't work, but the third one did, because you're using consumer insight. But you spoke about the focus group example. People don't know what they don't know, right?
Mhm.
So it really depends whether you ask them a good question or a stupid question, right? I mean, they are best when they react to something, most consumers, right? And the best way to look at it is looking at an Apple iPhone versus a BlackBerry. I think that's the best example. So if you go back to the Amazon Echo example, you got tried one, tried two, but the third one is successful. The first two failures are good failures, and the warehouse is not.
Well, and that is a useful callback, I think, to the idea of declaring failure too soon, because a lot of people credit the failure of Amazon Fire, their attempt at a phone, with having the capability on board and the experience to come up with the Echo. So even though it was a multi-million dollar, hundreds of millions of dollars failed, it
Right.
went on to build something very powerful within the company. So yeah, that is an interesting. That definitely is worthy of celebration.
I'll talk about something else that I noticed when I dived into the startup world. Have you ever wondered why there aren't too many people, classic corporate innovators who are entrepreneurs? Just ask yourself. They know all the theory. They've done the fundamental experiments, but I don't know many corporate innovators or not too many business heads who have gone on to make it as really big entrepreneurs.
So let me just explore what you mean, what your definition there. So you mean somebody who's been a successful COO or CEO turning around and doing a new startup? Is that your definition?
Let me rephrase. I wouldn't say no. I'm talking about corporate innovators, not CEOs and CEOs, because they've run a business and they could get into a startup quite easily. But I'm talking about people who run an innovation department or those kind of folks. I haven't seen many of them, or people who write about the theory of innovation. I tend to see them lean towards more of the theoretical, right? And though they know every step of the way and they can understand, but they somehow can't do it. And I was trying to understand why. And then I met people. There are some people who just do not give up. And they will get there eventually, or they will die trying.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because they have this unbelievable belief, unshakable belief of what they are doing.
Yeah.
And so what happens, and we don't get to meet many of these people very often. These people, they will make 3,000 mistakes and they still don't care, because they know they've got a North Star objective of why they're here in this world to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, they will somehow beg, borrow, steal, but they'll find people who will help them along their way to get where they are. And now I've met 2 or 3 who've done that. They made absurd mistakes, but they've got there.
Well, I think the flip side of that is they probably wouldn't survive a week inside a corporation.
Yeah, absolutely not.
No. Right. It's one thing to have the determination to go through 99 failures and succeed on the 100th. It's very hard to do that and get a paycheck. Correct. There aren't too many organizations like that. And maybe this is the balance, right? Between maybe if they sat that guy down or that gal down and said, well, do a scientific method canvas 99 times, because then we can see the upside of what you're doing. So maybe it's a matter of leadership, finding a way to harness these people.
Correct. And I find in the truth, and this is anecdotal, There are three people that I came across who were like this. They were really good at sales and business development, and very good at picking themselves up. You
Hmm.
punch them on the canvas, and they pick themselves up and get up again and again and again. It's amazing, and good at BD, but they don't have the patience to go through the scientific method.
Right.
So you'll need a couple of other people who actually get the job done, as
Right.
long as they don't interfere.
Yeah, I think you're right. I can sort of imagine the person we're talking about not responding well when told to fill out a form.
Yeah.
um, so another question about failure within an organization that I'd like to explore with you is, if we allow failure, and I think it comes back to the scientific method, but I still like to explore it a little bit more. How do you know when people on your team are contributing? Because if you're forgiving of mistakes,
Yeah.
how do you know you're making progress?
So in my last large corporate role, so as a general manager, I had to turn around a B2B business. And I had a team of close to 50 people. There was sales, marketing, finance. It's a classic business division. We had fires, maybe about 3 or 4 fires every day on the business. And the business was functioning in silos, 9 categories selling to 23 industries. So complex business for starters. But the issue is, how do you make sure somebody is doing their job, right? Because in this particular business with B2B, there wasn't enough data related to the market, related to industries. You had to function a little bit like a startup, but even there were no companies to offer the data. And so the only way is to really set up a KPI system. That's you call it KPIs or OKRs, which I found extremely useful. So once you get your strategy and your prioritization, like a BCG matrix, you now need to make sure that everybody is rowing along the same direction, right? And so the KPIs are extremely important to make sure that they're tallying up on an annualized basis and on a quarterly basis, and that there's incentive for each one to work. One of the things that I found was sales were, in before I tweaked and changed a little bit, sales would have sort of like, I need to grow, but grow at what cost?
Mm-hmm.
So finance and operations will say, you're not growing because I'm going to hold you back because you're not, you're not doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you got to find the right balance and guardrails to decentralize that model. So that's one. The second element of getting people to align and making sure that they achieve what they need to achieve is to make sure that you are recalibrating some of these KPIs on a quarterly basis. And the more decentralized it is, like if you get department heads working with you to look at that, the better. Because everything is not linear in terms of what the objective that you set for yourself as an organization is going to happen. Because every quarter or literally every month, there's new business opportunities or new red flags that are coming your way.
Right.
So when everybody drops everything to go and fix this, what happens to your broader objectives, right? So you need to recalibrate. Otherwise, your team is going to think that you as a manager don't have a clue on what's going on, or there's a disconnect between different groups after a point of time. So you have to reprioritize. That's the second element. And the third element is communication. Everybody needs to know what's going on, and transparency. So if sales has to drop everything and they have a deliverable to finance, you got to step in and say, give them a breather. Otherwise, you're going to have friction, right? And
Right.
so those are things that you do to enable the team to win, and you remove hurdles to get them to achieve what they need to achieve.
So moving on to sort of, and it's interesting that you bring up KPIs and OKRs. My suspicion is that a lot of startups rely on that huge stretch goal that aligns everyone in a certain direction. And so they aren't necessarily very skilled at individually assessing people and motivating individuals and guiding individuals. They just set a North Star and they crack the whip. And I say that because I think a lot of startups have a reputation for being very difficult environments, very high stress. Is that unavoidable? Is it possible to be happy and be stretching for or going for a stretch goal at the same time?
It is possible to be happy. It really depends on the leader. There's no two ways about it. I don't think there's any startup or any large organization where happiness is a linear thing that is continuous. Otherwise, I don't think you're really pushing the boundaries. You will have dark days. There's no two ways about it. But I was listening to there was a serial entrepreneur from MIT. He was on an MIT podcast. But one of the things that sort of captured my attention was the fact that he was really happy working with his two co-founders from MIT, and he was on his third or fourth startup, and he said, "Look, we have friction, we have dark days, and we challenge one another. But I know exactly what that person is doing. When they say that they're going to do it, they will do it. Or when they raise their hands and say that they're struggling, they know that they can come to me or somebody else because they know my super strength, right? And so when I say it really depends on the leader sets that sort of environment of you can be happy really pushing the boundaries at 3,000 miles per hour, and it does not have to be in the startup world. That's pure leadership.
Right.
I mean, you can see this with, was it Scott and Amundsen, who went to, was it the polar expedition, right? And they had there was an issue there, right? That.
We're talking about like 100 years ago, right? The idea most of you will likely die and it will be horrible and we're going to achieve something wonderful. Is that the speech you're talking about?
No, that's not the speech that I'm talking about, but I'm just saying that this idea of leadership, and that you could be in a challenging situation, but you could get through it by enabling the group to feel a little bit of safety that one has each other's back, right? That's really on the leader, right? And so your question about, oh my God, is it stressful as a startup? Yeah, it is absolutely stressful, but you can have fun.
So you are COO, as we talked earlier, Chief Operating Officer at Modgarden, which I'm sure is one of the nicer environments. But I think it's a startup, correct? Is it qualified as a startup? So what is Modgarden's mission?
So Modgarden is trying to provide access to regenerative food to the world. And Amar, who is the founder, he's a former Wharton grad. He's one of those guys. Remember, I was telling you about you can push him down, he'll pick himself up and do it. He'll make it happen. I have absolutely no doubts about it. But his vision is something that I've completely bought into. Is this whole idea of a regenerative economy, right, or agricultural economy? Because I come from an agricultural economy. We are third generation coffee planters, and his insight is this: everything that we do in agriculture for the past 100 odd years is all about efficiency, right? And so there is science to show that the plants that we're eating right now, or the food that we're consuming, the vegetables and so on, the nutrition density or the nutrition quality lacks significantly, right? And so what we're trying to do with ModGarden is to try to is to create these units, right, where you put soil, and this is really rich, nutrient dense soil that makes your plants highly nutrient dense. So we're working with an agricultural college here in Canada They've done the science behind the soil because it's all about the soil, right? And you have good quality organic plants that grow in your home, right? And you can have nutrient dense food accessible at your fingertips. That's what he wants to do, and bring it so that you're looking at department store or grocery stores that have a lot of the food, even if it's organic, like the plant-based food, plant-based vegetables. It doesn't mean that it's nutrient dense or nutritionally great for you.
Right.
And that's what we are trying to address and achieve and bring it to the masses.
So I've looked around and I've seen at least one of the units that's I don't know if it's being sold yet or if it's being proposed for the home, but it resembles a hydroponic system for growing vegetables or fruits or whatever. Right. But I think the term hydroponic is inaccurate. You're relying on rich soil. You're not relying on a nutrient bath.
Correct.
Right?
So yes. So it looks like a hydroponic system, but it does not use water or a chemical base to grow the plants. It's clearly soil based with the right mix, like I said, and there's proof. We've got scientific evidence that the nutrition density is good for you.
And how does the soil generate it?
I'm on contract, but
okay.
Because that's the secret sauce, if you will.
Okay.
But it's all natural. It's a mix of soil and a couple of other natural items, right? That are used to enable higher nutrition density.
And I presume, and forgive me if this is proprietary as well, but I presume that when you look at industrial farming, the reason so much fertilization is done is because the soil itself becomes depleted. So
correct.
If you're going all natural, I presume you need to replace the soil periodically. Is this true?
Correct. That's right. So Amar is right now doing a raise in the States. And it's for a sizable amount. So we did an equity crowd fund. We got to a particular point to enable him to do the raise, and so he's going and pitching out to investors. Once that is done, we'll be doing all the testing, the scientific method that we spoke about, to get it off the ground, right? And so to answer your question about the soil coming in, that's an assumption. It's a hypothesis. Yes, you could have a subscription-based model for soil, but how many would take to it? Right. How much would you pay? We got to cross those thresholds.
And it, so they always say you are what you eat, but you are also what you eat eats. And so, if you go to the trouble of cooking food fresh at home, it's because right. You want that to be fresh. But now you're saying you actually want the vegetables to be fresh right out of the countertop.
Right.
And in all things, there's a question of where is it, because obviously, with industrial farming, like I'm accustomed to, 99% of what I eat, I'm sure is made the not old fashioned, but the modern way of industrial farming, which means it's probably bombarded with fertilizer and probably pesticides and herbicides. It's picked, it's packed, it's shipped, it's stored, it's refrigerated, it's unpacked, it's displayed. I buy it, I bring it home. That's a lot to ask for something to still be fresh. So have it instead of it coming across the continent, this is coming from across the counter. Of course, it's going to be very fresh. But there are multiple points in between, right? You could have a neighborhood. You could have the grocery store grow this on your behalf. There are vertical farming things that are going on that are local, but not in the home. What does jobs to be done have to say about why I'd want it in the home as opposed to at the local Walmart?
That's a great question. A really good question. It depends on the target customer, right? So there's you talk about some of the vertical farms in the store. For example, there's one at Sobeys. I don't know whether you've.
I haven't seen that. No, I should go.
Yeah, so it's really cool. But if you observe that vertical farm at Sobeys, um, there are herbs. You pick any herb. They're literally priced at the same price point as the regular shelf, which is next door. And as you observe, because I like doing these things, I saw maybe about 10 or 12 people pick up the herbs from the regular store, the regular section, walk past, this beautiful shelf where it's freshly grown at the same price point, and walk away.
Hmm.
And it really, like, I was scratching my head. Why would you want to do that when that is fresh, right? And so that's habit one. So you're asking this question about jobs to be done. There's an element of habit, and really depends on who is asking for it. So the little bit of work that we did on using jobs to be done with ModGarden, we found that people who garden really, really understand soil. And then they're like, oh my God, hydroponics, I don't want to even look at it. Organic food is not necessarily truly organic. A lot of people are making claims of what is organic. And so you have that. And so a lot of them, when they're doing, summer gardening, they're growing the herbs and tomatoes and stuff like that. But in the winter, they miss it. And so we've pre-sold units of this, of ModGarden, the ModGarden units in the winter. And we found that people want to actually continue growing. So they like the idea of growing. And it's not only better for you, but it tastes delicious.
Mm-hmm.
And the best example of tasting delicious is my 6-year-old, who was 5 years last year. Kids don't lie. They'll either just tell you this sucks or not. I put some of the stuff that had grown from ModGarden, and I left something else, and he said, hey, this ModGarden thing is delicious. And so he would keep picking it, because there is something when you pick it fresh, that's grown out of soil, that has a deliciousness kick to it, that people who cook food really understand, that you can't get from something that's taken 1 week to come to your place. So
that's very convincing, and the argument that somebody who especially in Canada can't garden all year long, this is a great way to sort of sublimate that urge and keep that fresh food going. Sure. So and as you point out, as I think you pointed out earlier, you don't want to boil the ocean by saying 70% of the world wants this.
Yeah.
You want a beachhead. You want certain people to love it.
Correct.
And then when they have company, they're going to be like, and by the way, I grew this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it spreads.
Absolutely. And by the way, it's a beautiful unit. I don't know whether you've seen the website.
I've seen the YouTube video, so I think I've seen at least a version of it.
Okay. So it won an award with at Milan Design Week, which is a big deal. Large crowd over there. The chief designer of Ferrari, popped over to Amar and said, I'd love to take a crack at it, maybe version 2. It's beautiful. It's just a beautiful piece. And it's so, in a world where design has become something ever since Apple really kicked that in, I think it's, it lends very well to the home while also delivering functional.
So you are also involved in EVA, which I think I may have said incorrectly, Elements Ventures Accelerator. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, I call it EVA Ventures. And
EVA. Okay.
Yeah.
So does EVA have a relationship with ModGarden, or are they parallel efforts that you're involved in?
Parallel efforts. They don't have a relationship. They did know each other before I met each of them. And so I toggle between the two.
Okay. And from where I sit, and the reason I went in this order is because your experience helping people with strategy and transformations is what makes you valuable in a company like ModGarden. EVA is an effort to do what you, if I'm reading this right, it's sort of trying to expand what you do for one startup to multiple startups. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
Correct. I mean, with ModGarden, we've become part of a couple of well-known, reputed accelerators in the States. So I understand internally how they function. Actually, some really cool stuff. We met mentors who worked on the tetrahedron accelerator. I never thought in my life I'd meet people like this, right? Who are theoretical physicists who work with the U.S. Army for to catalyze innovation. That's the kind of work. And so with ModGarden, I'd met kind of established investors. So that's one lens that I was able to see. The second lens is because of the work that I'd been following all the top innovation thinkers as well as Silicon Valley for 8-9 years. I was able to work with the partners at EVA to actually put a course together. And now, and actually work. And so we create something called a venture studio. So it identifies the blind spots with some of these startups and says, okay, we'll work with you over there, versus just saying, here's a vanilla piece, and then, you just go through it, which is what most accelerators do. And therefore, you're not quite looking at how successful is it for the organization. It tends to be more mass oriented. And so we can't keep up with the demand at EVA. We've got calls from the UK, from Singapore, from Holland, from the US. And we're like, look, we're just starting with a few of these startup companies, want to get it right. We've done zero marketing right now. There's a gap in early stage, whether it's plant-based or right across. And most people say it's funding, but quite honestly, you can get funding and you can fail big time.
Sure.
Because it boils down to the basic piece. But just on EVA, I love teaching and helping people go forward, especially from an innovation standpoint. So it's a personal passion project.
So let's talk about the type, and I realize maybe some of it still is proprietary, but you have companies coming to, or rather startups coming to you, entrepreneurs saying, I have a product idea or a service idea that I need to get off the ground. What is it? What are the first questions you would ask them, and what would you offer them?
So the question, so here's how it works. They walk us through a pitch deck. Then we deliberate if it's within what we want to focus on. So plant-based foods, is it ag tech, or various other things. So if it's something that's highly technology oriented with AI, we might pass them on to partners at Waterloo, Velocity, some of the other accelerators that we built a network with. So those are some of the questions. We do have a contract with them, which is, we consider that a little bit of a dating game, where the first month we work with them closely to understand how they think, behave, etc. Because honestly, 45 minutes or half an hour, you're not going to get anything out of them.
Right.
You have to see how they follow through. Are they coachable? That means we're telling them, here's a potential blind spot. Are they going to follow through? Usually you'll find the ones who are not coachable, that is challenging. And I've got friends at Velocity who said the same thing. So you look for three elements. How large is the market size? And for that, there's no tried and tested algorithm. You got to just keep reading and be abreast of what's happening globally. How large is the market? The second thing is, how these founders, right? So they always say, back the jockey, not the horse.
Right.
The horse is the product, right? So what's your sense of the founder? Coachable, confidence. Would this person be able to hustle? Do they have resilience? Because you're going to go through really dark days. Are they good to work with the community? Because we're also trying to build a community to help Canada's innovation, if you will, and so on. So there's a little checklist that's going on through our head, even though we listed it out as you're reading through, and are you willing to follow through? So that's the initial piece, and then in month one we contract with them. We got a specific contract with them, and so we go through different elements of understanding what their business is about and how they work, while they understand what our module is about and how we work as well. And then you can walk away after one month, either side, to say, yeah, it's all good, or we take that forward. And so that 1 month, I think, is really helpful. The second piece is how is the contract sort of really structured, right? I can't get into the granularity again because of my internal contract with EVA, but I'll explain the principles. The principles are what's right for the founder is right for EVA, right? So we have to make sure that it's tailored to EVA, to the founder's success. And so when the founder gets success, then it passes along to EVA. That's just really the most fundamental principle, and which is why we focus on making sure that the key elements of getting to product market fit is all addressed. And so the paths along the way is, can we get the product, can we get the right research, and can we get the right experimentation to product market fit, which is one. And the second element is, can you strengthen your team so it's rock solid? Because you as a solo founder, not everyone's Jeff Bezos. Let me just put it that way. Right?
So let's say I come to you and I say, my idea is vitamin coffee. Okay. Yeah. Not vitamin water, vitamin coffee. So people want to drive to work drinking coffee, knowing they're just doing something good for their body. That's my pitch. And how much skin in the game do you expect me to have at this point? Like, do you expect me to have a product in hand? Do you expect me to have product research or user research? Or can I come to you with an idea? At what point do you want somebody to come?
That's a good question. We need you to have a recipe, right? So it's, initially when we were looking at, okay, where do you start? That was a really good question. We were looking at there's a point where the system starts helping you, and that's at about $2 million. But prior to that, you're in no man's land, and it's a size.
What do you mean, $2 million in revenue or $2 million in investment?
$2 million in revenue. So I'm not even looking at investment, right? Where the government kicks in. Yes, there are other accelerators. Like York has, David Kwok. Do you know David Kwok?
Yes.
He runs a great ship over there. So there are others who also help in this space. We are earlier than that. So we are, give me, here's your recipe, and then we help you take it forward.
And then, so the contribution you're making is saying to somebody who says, I sell vitamin water. I only have $2 million in revenue. I want to be $200 million in revenue. How do I get from A to B? You say, okay, well, we'll take you under our wing. We'll help you. I presume we'll help you find investors. We'll help you find production facilities. We'll help you navigate the process of growing your company. Is that the type of thing that might happen?
Yeah, that is the type of thing. So we don't get into the $2 million size. We get into the up to 200,000 size.
Oh, I see. Sorry, I misunderstood. So so you are interested in people before the $200 million mark.
So let me clarify what I said before. The system, by and large, tends to help organizations much more once you cross the 1.5 million to 2 million range. Banks, the government, and so on. So that's part one. But there are other people like there are other organizations like Arlene Dickinson's organization, Venture Park Studios, and so on that help out at a later stage, probably maybe 750 to 900,000, but around that range. What we noticed is that there's no one at that zero standpoint getting up to 100, 150,000. And that's where we really want to help at that place. And so you have a great question. Where in the process do I have an idea, like you pointed out, but it's no, you need to have a recipe, right? Some form of experimentation, and we will quiz you to figure out whether you want to change the world in some way or form, right? Are you in it to be a real entrepreneur, or is it a side gig? And if it's a side gig, we'd say, hey, listen, we can point you to some other places, but we want people who want to change the world, which is a good segue to the next piece, which is another aspect of EVA, is that we want every organization that comes out of EVA to be a B Corporation. That means doing good to the world, and B Corps have a sense of certification. They have a certification rigor to get you to help the planet in the right way.
So, okay, there's three things in there I want to pick apart. The first one is you basically laid out an approach that says there's no point doing this if the founders don't do well. We do well by the founders doing well.
Correct.
But you're not you are investing your time and your expertise and your reputation and your connections. You're not investing money. Is that true?
That's true. So at this point of time, we don't have a fund right now, but we're working on getting a fund. But we've got a whole host of partner VCs and partner angel investors. And so, come to demo day, then they pitch.
Okay. And that's where the connections come in.
Correct. And that's where the connections come in. So we're actively looking at connections. There is interest definitely in this space. There's no two ways about it. If you look at some of the companies that are coming out of Canada, they that have done well. There's a company called Love Good Fats, Midday Squares, and so on. They've gone through their their struggles initially, but now doing really well. But then you get to a particular point, and then you can get acquired by the larger CPG companies. So there's definitely different stages. There's definitely interest. We've spoken to folks in the US, but really what we want to do is we want to nail the model first, which we have, but it's again finishing it and taking it to the next level. Because the funding will come when you just have good products and good founders coming in. If you look at Y Combinator, they took 7 years before they actually raised their first fund.
Interesting. I didn't think of that. Okay.
So I analyzed Y Combinator, downloaded their case study, spoken to people. There's a Harvard case study on YC. So some of the values and how they think. And why do you think so many unicorns came out of there, right? And so how do they work, and what's creating the moat for Y Combinator? EVA needs a moat, right? What is that moat, right? So those are some of the examples, and so we are a product to our to the founders who come to us. We're a service that we're offering, right? And so we got to figure all that out. But I'd say the funding piece, right now we work with investors, and then at a future point in time you raise the fund. So
you raised the name Arlene Dickinson, and if I'm correct, she's the one on Shark Tank.
That's right.
And I don't think the mechanics of Shark Tank can be very realistic, but the idea of pitching to a group of people who may or may not be interested, I think that is realistic. At least that in my mind's eye, it looks like what somebody's coming to you and pitching would be like. Is that true?
That's look, I've seen a few pitches, actually quite a few pitches right now. Let's say a serious pitch, right, would go through a formal pitch deck, and it's quick. There's no time for long-winded answers. It's bang, 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 and you run through 10 slides very, very quickly, and then you go through sort of like whole host of Q&A questions. right? Some of the questions you asked, moat and et cetera, and valuation, all the things that that an investor is kind of looking for flags of saying, why should I not invest in this company? It then will go into a couple of other rounds before you actually get into the check phase.
And do you wind up being having a stake in the companies that you help get off the ground? Is that how EVA sustains itself?
That's right. A stake, and then there's some cash payment.
Okay, and for a startup, that would generally be flowing from investments made by angels and then VCs.
Correct.
You raised the topic of B Corp, and maybe you can expand on that, because certainly I wasn't familiar with what a B Corp was until about a year ago.
Okay. So let me first start by saying that my partner is more of an expert on B corporations, right? But I'll give you a high level understanding. So there's a classic corporation, limited corporation, or a large corporate, but a B Corp is more. It's got sustainability written all over it, right? It's not just about revenue and profit, but it's about doing good for the people in your organization as well as for the planet. And so you've got to pick one or two things and in a significant way measure your ESG footprint in some way or form. And so the whole checklist, for people who are interested in listening, just go to the B Corp website, and you'll see a checklist that tells you, do you meet the criteria or do you not meet the criteria to get a B Corporation certification?
And that returns us to what I haven't explored yet, and that is that EVA is very interested in what you'd call plant-based, cell-based ag tech. Can you expand on what that means? What is the impact you hope to have with that technology?
Sure. So plant-based, cell-based, all of them have significant implications to human health, for starters, because of red meat and so on, but also the impact to the planet. So, methane from cows has an impact, to the planet. There's, as cows eat grass, there's runoff. What's happening to fishing? There's so many things that there's benefits. There's benefits to more of a plant-based diet, and people are buying into it. That's why plant-based has picked up, or even cell-based has picked up, because it's not so much about vegan folks as much. Vegan folks always existed. It's what you call flexitarians. It's the hamburger-loving, steak-loving dude who's like, okay, once in a while, I don't mind a plant-based burger, right? Or it tastes the same because I'm not going to compromise on the taste, but I know it makes me better off versus my other choice, right?
Right.
So you're seeing this uptick in flexitarian eating habits, not just here, but across the globe. And that's part one of it. Part two is they know that there is an impact to the environment.
And there's some really exciting things going on right now with cultured food. There's even like lab grown meat these days, and you can do a lot of flexible things. Like you could have ostrich. You didn't kill an ostrich, but you could try ostrich meat, right?
Yeah.
Like, or even dinosaur meat. If you tailor, it's almost like 3D printing. You can come up with almost anything.
Yep. Yeah.
Do you see? It seems to me that this is going to have, as you pointed out, an enormous impact with the environment, but also it removes one of the constraints for population growth. I mean, there's not enough land to go around the way we make food now.
Yeah.
But if we're able to grow it at the local Walmart, or create it at the local Walmart, or even on our counter, it changes the math quite a bit.
It does. So for starters, I mean, yes, there's demand for such type of food. Secondly, there is an environmental impact that you spoke about. I'd say people know about this, I mean, by and large, but there's a third element, and this is the Canadian element, if you will. So if you look at the way the United States is focused on innovation as much as Canada, they're really big on it. Like, so you got clusters in California, in Colorado, in the New York region, and so on, that is really big on plant-based, cell-based, and there's this whole ecosystem of scientists and manufacturing facilities and labs that can help you get ahead. I personally believe, and so as well as my partners, and there are a few other people that we've spoken to, so Plant-Based Foods of Canada, that there's an opportunity, a significant opportunity for Canada to be more proactive in this space. You think about what's happened, there's a technology boom that's been happening in Toronto, for starters, but in Canada for the past 10 years, right? 10 years. And there was a recent report that came out a few days ago called the Global Genome Report. Haven't fully gone through it, but it's about 123 pages, where it talks about how Toronto, the Toronto Waterloo corridor, right, has gained billions of dollars because of the foresight of getting, people with, it's a leader in AI, leader in technology, and it's a good cycle that's happened for the country, for the region, right? And it'll keep growing. Plant-based is an opportunity to do that, because we have all the elements in Canada to do it. You got the know-how and the knowledge for cell-based or ag-tech or plant-based around here, right? But we're lacking cohesion and resources, right? Something, it's almost like, think about Lego, right? Think about it as Lego. We've got 15 different pieces, right? The New York cluster has already built 3 or 4 hotels, right? If you use the Monopoly analogy.
Monopoly, yeah,
right? Yeah. You've done it, right? We've got all those things. Like, there's a Saskatoon cluster, and so there's this concept called super clusters, but it's really focused on helping pure protein, if you will, or exporting agriculture versus, moving us further up the value chain, because there's a significant opportunity that I don't know whether we are thinking about this proactively as a Canadian, as a country, as much as what's actually happening out there in the US, but more importantly, what's happening there in smaller countries. So Singapore and Holland, right, are way, way smaller than Canada. But in a very proactive manner, the government has stepped in and said, we're going to punch well above our weight on plant-based foods. And so I've got access to what I call ecosystem decks, right? Where they're saying, okay, let's make sure that we have the right angels, VC ecosystem. We got labs that's government funded. We have contract manufacturers. We are looking at R&D and helping out the educational institutions. It's a full circle ecosystem. It's so well planned, right? And when you see that, it's like, and I think, okay, we as a country are missing out on the next 10 billion opportunity, because there's nobody to hold us, as an ecosystem. And so the parts are slowly coming together, but I don't see it coming in more from, it could actually happen as a benefit to us if the government took a more proactive approach and said, yeah, how do we get to, more proactively help plant-based, products or cell-based products or even ag-tech happen at this early stage, because most of the failure rate is actually happening at that early stage, and creating something that's more cohesive. Because as I started out, the failure rate in my assumption or assessment is about 95%. most of them slowly die out, right? And so it's very concerning for me because I can see this happening and it's an opportunity, but I wish there were higher forces to help out.
Just a quick question on the cell-based food, cell-based agriculture. What are the raw materials that go into that? I mean, it's not thin air, right? Where do we get the materials that become the food through that process?
Right. So I'm not going to. I sat through a few cell-based business pitches from scientists. So there's a partner of mine who's more involved and in depth in that space. But I'm just going to simplify it and say, it's petri dish thinking. But all the science is accessible and available within our university network over here. And so they basically try and grow meat, if you will, from the lab. It's as simple as that. I cannot say that I know the science in great detail.
Fair enough. I'll maybe I'll follow up with your partner someday. Yeah. So the final question, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I think one that points to a really exciting future. So not only are you working to make innovation get off the ground, which serves us all, but also, what's on our plate is healthier, and the way we treat our planet is healthier. It's fantastic. So the final question, and I wonder if this is a clue on why there isn't more investment in Canada in ag tech, or at least not more consolidated investment, is the fact that right now we export $56 billion a year in conventional food.
Correct.
And that there's probably a lot of interests in the country that are like, whoa, things are fine. We don't need to invest in an alternative. Is that one of the possible hurdles we need to cross?
It might be anchoring bias, to your point of that $56 billion point. That is my best guess. I haven't really, dived into policy in such a big way, but it's very easy to move up the value chain because all the elements are out there. And I really think that somebody needs to knock on the door of government, which is probably something that we should do, and talk to them and say, here's how big this could be. Because you have other governments, including China, Singapore, Holland, for certain, and the United States looking at this. Why can't we do that? Because we think that could be 10 billion, 15 billion, which could add to that 56 billion number. So I don't know very specifically about the policy per se, where that's shaping out. But let's see. I do know a few people in the government, so it's worthwhile asking them and saying, what are your thoughts? Where are you thinking this could go?
Sid, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on innovation and the exciting future before us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me too. Goodbye.
My guest today was Sid Apaya. A link to Sid's profile on LinkedIn and links to the websites for EVA Partners and ModGarden will be in the show notes. My name is Tim Hampton, and you can reach me at tim@unusuallywellinformed.com. Thanks for listening. I hope you will subscribe and join me for the next show with another unusually well-informed leader in business and technology.
Thank you for listening to the Unusually Well-Informed podcast.
The opinions expressed by the host and guests on the Unusually Well-Informed podcast are their own and do not reflect that of their employer or any other affiliation.